rich CEO saw a little girl cleaning a school bathroom, and couldn't believe his eyes. One afternoon, Richard Cole, a wealthy CEO known for his sharp suits and disciplined lifestyle, decided to leave his office a little earlier than usual. He had been buried in meetings all day. Contracts spread across the polished mahogany table in his corner office on the top floor of the skyscraper. But family was family. And he had promised his little daughter Emma that he would personally pick her up from school today. So, shutting his laptop and putting away his phone, he stepped out into the bright sunlit city. His driver opened the car door, but today he chose to drive himself. It was rare for him to enjoy such moments, away from the constant rush of numbers, reports, and strategies. When he reached Emma's school, he parked outside and stepped into the lively building, where the laughter of children echoed through the halls. Emma's face lit up when she saw her father standing there, tall and smiling, in his crisp blue suit. "Daddy," she shouted, running into his arms. He hugged her tightly, feeling the stress of his day melting away in that simple embrace. As they began to walk toward the exit, Emma tugged on his hand and whispered, "Daddy, I need to go to the washroom before we go home." Richard nodded with patience. He didn't like to rush her. So he took her by the hand and guided her down the hallway, toward the bathroom area. As he opened the door and waited near the entrance, his eyes fell upon a scene that made him freeze. Inside, a small girl, no more than 6 years old, was crouched on the floor wearing oversized gloves that looked too big for her tiny hands. She held a rag in one hand and a bucket of dirty water beside her. With slow, careful movements, she was scrubbing the tiles of the school bathroom floor. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her little denim overalls looked worn out. She wasn't playing, she wasn't pretending. She was working, cleaning with a seriousness that no child her age should have. For a moment, Richard blinked, wondering if his eyes were deceiving him. But no, it was real. A little girl, younger than his own daughter, was bent over the floor of a school bathroom, doing the work of an adult janitor. He felt a jolt of shock run through him. In his world, children this age were supposed to be sitting in bright classrooms, holding pencils and coloring books, not scrubbing bathroom floors with rubber gloves. He glanced at Emma, who had also noticed the girl. Emma looked confused, her innocent voice whispering, "Daddy, why is she cleaning? Isn't she too little?" That question pierced Richard's heart. He had no answer. Slowly, he stepped closer and spoke softly to the girl, not wanting to scare her. "Sweetheart, why are you cleaning this bathroom?" The little girl paused, her small shoulders stiffening. She looked up with wide blue eyes, unsure whether to answer or stay silent. After a long moment, she said in a low, shaky voice, "Because my mom is sick, and my dad is gone. If I don't help, we don't have money. The school lets me clean so my little brother can study here." Her words were broken, heavy with a burden far too big for her fragile frame. Richard's chest tightened as he listened. A child her age should not even know the weight of such responsibilities. He crouched down to meet her at eye level, still stunned. "But you're only 6, he said gently. "You should be learning, playing, being happy. Not doing this." The girl bit her lip and shrugged. "If I don't, then who will?" she whispered. Her hands trembled as she dipped the rag back into the bucket. Richard watched in silence, his mind spinning. In his own home, Emma had every toy, every book, every comfort she could ask for. And here, just a few feet away, another little girl was sacrificing her childhood for survival. It felt unfair, it felt wrong. And for the first time in a long time, Richard Cole, the man who thought he had seen everything, didn't know what to say. Emma tugged on his sleeve again. "Daddy, can't we help her?" she asked with innocent sincerity. Richard's throat tightened. His daughter's words were like a spark, igniting something deep inside him. In that moment, he realized he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen this. Life had just handed him a truth he wasn't prepared for. Money, success, and power meant nothing if you ignored the cries hidden behind small eyes and fragile smiles. He looked at the girl again and said softly, "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Sofia." Richard repeated the name in his heart. Sofia. A name that, in an instant, had burned itself into his memory. As Emma went into the stall, Richard remained at the doorway, watching Sofia. Every stroke of her rag across the cold tiles felt like a strike against his conscience. A little girl, robbed of her innocence, forced into labor to protect her family. He knew this was only the beginning of a story he couldn't walk away from. Deep down, he felt it. His life was about to change, not because of a boardroom decision. Not because of $1 million deal, but because of a little girl he had found cleaning a school bathroom, when she should have been holding a pencil in her hand. Richard stood there, his hand resting on the doorframe, his thoughts running wild. He could hear the sound of Emma washing her little hands in the sink, humming a tune softly to herself, completely unaware of how heavy the moment had become for her father. But Richard's eyes stayed locked on Sofia, the 6-year-old girl who continued to scrub the floor as if nothing was unusual about what she was doing. The rag moved in small circles, her hands chapped from soap and water, the oversized gloves slipping off her fingers every few seconds. She kept adjusting them, pushing them back in place. But she never stopped working. There was something heartbreaking about the determination in her little body. Richard, who had closed $1 million deals and had faced ruthless competitors across polished conference tables, felt strangely powerless in front of a child armed with nothing but a rag and a bucket. He cleared his throat softly. "Sofia," he said again, this time more gently, as though trying to connect with her in a way that might make her pause. She lifted her head briefly, her eyes tired but calm. "Yes?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of innocence and exhaustion. Richard crouched down again, his expensive suit brushing against the wet floor tiles. Something he would have never imagined doing on any ordinary day. "Tell me, do your teachers know you do this?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, they let me. They said as long as I don't disturb the classes and I finish my work, it's okay. My mom can't pay the full fee anymore, so I help like this. They don't bother me much as long as the bathrooms stay clean." Richard felt a wave of anger rise inside him, not at Sofia, but at a system that allowed a child to shoulder a weight far beyond her age. He looked at her small hands again, covered in soap and dirt, and wondered what kind of scars such responsibility would leave on her heart. Emma returned just then, her small footsteps echoing across the tiled floor. She dried her hands on her dress, and looked from her father to Sofia. "Daddy, can we take her home?" she asked suddenly. Her innocent question making Richard swallow hard. He smiled gently at Emma and shook his head, not because he didn't want to help, but because he didn't know how to explain the complexity of the situation to his little girl. "Not yet, sweetheart," he whispered. "But maybe we can find another way to help her." Emma's lips pressed into a small pout, but she didn't argue. Instead, she crouched down beside Sofia and said, "You're really brave. I don't even like cleaning my room, but you're cleaning a whole bathroom." Sofia blinked at her, surprised. Then a small smile appeared on her face for the first time. It wasn't wide, it wasn't carefree, but it was a smile nonetheless. Richard's heart softened further at that sight. He stood up slowly, his thoughts heavy. He had to do something. He couldn't just leave this girl here. But how? This wasn't a business negotiation where he could sign a check and make the problem disappear. This was about a child's life, a family's struggle. Money might help, but it wouldn't fix the deeper wound. He needed to understand more. "Sofia," he said, "where is your mother now?" The little girl's face dropped. "She's at home. She's sick, really sick. Sometimes she can't even get out of bed. I try to take care of her, and my little brother too. He's 4. He doesn't know much. He just cries when he's hungry, so I make him bread if we have any." Richard clenched his jaw tightly, forcing back the rush of emotion threatening to escape. The picture Sofia painted with her trembling words was not just sad, it was unbearable. A child, forced into the role of a caretaker, left to face a world that had already stolen her childhood. Emma tugged her father's sleeve again. "Daddy, we can help, right? You always tell me we should help people if we can." Her eyes shone with trust, expecting her father to have the answer. Richard looked at her, then back at Sofia, and nodded. "Yes, Emma, we can help." His voice was firm now, not just a promise to his daughter, but to himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card. He handed it carefully to Sofia, though she stared at it in confusion. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a card with my name and number," Richard explained softly. "If you ever need anything, you call me. Don't be afraid. I'll come." Sofia held the card in her small, wet hand as though it were something foreign, something too valuable to belong to her. She tucked it quickly into the pocket of her overalls, nodding slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, though her tone carried doubt. As if kindness was something she wasn't used to receiving. Richard straightened up, his mind already racing with thoughts. He had resources, connections, and power. Maybe he couldn't change the entire world overnight, but he could change Sofia's world. At least, he had to try. As they walked out of the bathroom, Emma clung to her father's hand, looking back at Sofia with wide eyes filled with concern. Richard noticed and squeezed her hand gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll figure something out," he said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew this was just the beginning of a path he hadn't planned to walk. A path that would test not his business acumen, but his humanity. As they drove home that evening, Emma kept asking questions. "Daddy, why doesn't Sofia have toys like me? Why does she have to work? Can't her school just let her study?" Richard tried to answer carefully, explaining in the simplest way he could that not every child had the same opportunities, that sometimes life wasn't fair. But deep down, he wasn't satisfied with his own answers. He thought about Sofia's tired eyes, her trembling hands, and the quiet weight in her voice. He thought about the world he lived in, where CEOs like him sat in luxury while children like her fought battles they should never have faced. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Richard sat alone in his study. The city lights sparkled outside his window, but he hardly noticed them. On his desk lay files and reports, numbers that once consumed his every thought. But tonight, none of it seemed to matter. His mind was stuck in that small school bathroom, on the image of a little girl with a rag and a bucket. "Sofia." He whispered her name softly, as though saying it aloud anchored the promise he had made to himself. He couldn't forget her. And he wouldn't. Something had shifted inside him, something deeper than business or ambition. It was a call he couldn't ignore. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives. Richard leaned back in his leather chair. His eyes fixed on the city skyline, but his mind was far from the glittering towers outside his window. The sound of the clock ticking in the quiet study seemed louder than usual, marking every passing second of a night he couldn't rest. On the desk in front of him, the files remained untouched. Contracts worth millions waited for his signature. But none of it seemed urgent compared to the picture in his head. The picture of a 6-year-old girl crouched on a bathroom floor, scrubbing tiles with tiny, tired hands. He closed his eyes, rubbing his forehead. He had built his life on discipline and success, always believing that if he worked harder than anyone else, he could control outcomes. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, he felt out of control. He couldn't erase Sofia's face from his memory. Her quiet voice replayed in his mind, "If I don't, then who will?" Those words haunted him because they weren't the words of a child. They were the words of someone forced to grow up too soon. Richard stood up abruptly and walked toward the large window. The city was alive even at this late hour. Cars moving, lights flickering, people rushing. Somewhere, in the middle of all this, Sofia was probably trying to sleep in a small room. Maybe on a mattress she shared with her little brother. Maybe without enough food in her stomach. He imagined her tiny body curling up under a thin blanket, still carrying the exhaustion of the day. He clenched his fists. How could the world let this happen? And how could he, with all his power and resources, turn a blind eye? No. He wouldn't. He couldn't. The next morning, Richard skipped his usual chauffeur-driven ride and drove himself to the office. But instead of heading straight to the skyscraper, where his company operated, he took a detour back to Emma's school. He parked discreetly and walked inside, determined to find answers. As he entered, teachers greeted him politely, recognizing him as Emma's father, but he wasn't here for small talk. He asked directly to meet the principal. Within minutes, he was seated in a modest office, across from a middle-aged man who seemed slightly nervous to have such a powerful guest. "Mr. Cole," the principal began, "what brings you here this morning? Is everything all right with Emma? Richard shook his head. Emma is fine, he said firmly. I'm here to talk about another child. Sofia. The principal's face changed immediately, his polite smile fading into something more cautious. He adjusted his glasses and sighed. Sofia. Yes. She's a unique case. Richard leaned forward, his voice carrying an edge. Unique. She's 6 years old and scrubbing your school bathrooms. Do you call that unique? The principal shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Cole, please understand, the school tries its best. Sofia's mother is unwell and can't afford tuition. We allowed Sofia to help with small cleaning tasks as a way to ease the financial burden. It's unconventional. Yes, but it was the only solution we could find. At least this way, her brother gets to attend school without charge. Richard stared at the man, struggling to control his anger. So you're telling me you let a child trade her education for janitorial work? You're comfortable with that arrangement? The principal spread his hands helplessly. We don't have enough funds, Mr. Cole. We're a small private school. If we turned her away completely, both children would lose out. This was compromise. Richard leaned back in his chair, breathing deeply. He knew anger alone wouldn't solve anything. The principal wasn't entirely wrong, schools like this often struggled with resources. But still, it didn't excuse what he had seen. He tapped the desk thoughtfully before speaking again. How much are her fees? The principal blinked, startled. Excuse me, I said. Richard repeated, his voice sharper now. How much are her tuition fees? Both her and her brother. Full. The man hesitated, then gave him the figures. To Richard, the amount was laughably small compared to the sums he moved daily in his company. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote the payment for the entire year on the spot, sliding it across the desk. From now on, he said firmly, Sofia doesn't clean another bathroom in this school. Do you understand me? The principal looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing before he finally managed to say, yes, of course, Mr. Cole. This is very generous of you. We'll make sure she attends classes like the other children. Richard nodded curtly and stood up, not in the mood for gratitude. His heart was still too heavy, his mind racing with bigger questions. Paying her fees was one thing, but what about her life outside these walls? What about her sick mother, her hungry brother? That was where the real challenge lay. As Richard walked back through the hallway, children ran past him, laughing, chasing each other. For a brief second, he envied them. Their carefree spirits, their laughter untainted by the weight of survival. And then he spotted Sofia. She was sitting on a bench near the courtyard, her small backpack beside her, watching the other kids with quiet eyes. Richard approached slowly. She noticed him and stood up immediately, clutching the straps of her bag nervously. Did I do something wrong? She asked quickly, her voice trembling. Richard crouched down to her level and shook his head gently. No, Sofia. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you've been too strong. Stronger than any child should have to be. But listen to me carefully. You don't have to clean bathrooms here anymore. From today, you're just a student. Just like the others. Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. But how? She whispered. Richard smiled softly. Don't worry about that. Just promise me you'll study, play, and be a child again. That's your only job now. Tears welled up in her eyes, though she tried to hide them by lowering her gaze. For the first time, Richard saw a crack in the tough shell she had built around herself. She nodded silently. Richard reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Sofia, he said quietly. Remember that. As he left the school and walked back to his car, a new determination settled inside him. Paying her fees was only the first step. He couldn't stop here. He had the means to change her family's life, but more importantly, he had the responsibility now. Emma's innocent question still echoed in his heart. Daddy, can't we help her? Yes, they could. And they would. Richard had no idea where this path would lead. But he knew one thing for certain. It was a journey he was meant to take. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with hopeful eyes. Did you help Sofia, Daddy? Richard kissed her forehead and whispered, Yes, sweetheart. And we're going to help her even more. Emma smiled and closed her eyes, trusting her father completely. Richard stood there for a long time. watching her breathe softly, and silently vowed that he wouldn't stop until Sofia and her family had the life they deserved. He didn't know how yet. But he would find a way. For the first time in years, Richard felt like his wealth had a true purpose. And it wasn't to make him richer. It was to give back what others had been denied. 2. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of Richard's house, casting golden streaks across the dining table where Emma sat eating her breakfast cereal. Richard sipped his coffee quietly, his mind elsewhere. He nodded absently when Emma chattered about her school project, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Sofia. He had done one thing. Paid her tuition. Stopped her from scrubbing the school bathrooms. But that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He couldn't shake the image of her trembling little hands, her wary eyes, and her quiet confession about her sick mother and younger brother. He wanted to know more, needed to see the reality she lived in. For years he had controlled every aspect of his life, every detail of his empire, but now he realized he had been blind to the lives outside his glass tower. He set down his coffee cup and made a decision. Today he would find Sofia's home. After dropping Emma at school, Richard returned to the office. But he didn't head straight to his meetings. Instead, he called his assistant into the room. The young man entered briskly, tablet in hand, ready to run through the schedule of the day. Richard cut him off before he could start. "Cancel my morning appointments," he said firmly. The assistant blinked in shock. "Sir. But the board, reschedule them," Richard interrupted. "There's something more important I need to do." The assistant, though confused, nodded quickly. Richard picked up his jacket and walked out, leaving the corporate world behind for the day. He drove back to the school, this time not in his sleek black sedan, but in a simpler car he rarely used. He didn't want to attract attention. Parking nearby, he stepped out and approached the building, just as children were playing during recess. He spotted Sofia sitting quietly under a tree, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the other kids chase each other in a game of tag. He walked toward her. And she noticed him immediately, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, standing up quickly as though she had done something wrong. Richard smiled gently. "Relax, Sofia. I just wanted to see you. Do you have a little time after school today?" She tilted her head, unsure, then nodded slowly. "Yes. But why?" He crouched down slightly to meet her eye level. "Because I want to meet your mom. I want to see how she's doing. Will you take me to your home?" For a moment, she froze, fear flickering across her face. It's not a nice place," she whispered. Richard shook his head. "That doesn't matter. I just want to understand. Please." Sofia hesitated, then finally nodded. "Okay. But promise you won't be upset when you see." Richard's chest tightened at her words. What kind of world had she lived in that a 6-year-old had to prepare him for disappointment? He gave her a reassuring smile. "I promise." That afternoon, when school ended, Sofia waited for him by the gate. Her small figure looked even smaller compared to the crowd of children rushing out. She clutched her little backpack and glanced nervously around until she spotted Richard walking toward her. Together, they began the walk to her home. It wasn't far. But with each step, Richard felt the sharp contrast between her world and his. The clean streets near the school gradually gave way to cracked sidewalks, narrow alleys, and buildings with peeling paint and broken windows. The further they went, the more the air seemed heavy with neglect. The more faces looked tired and worn. Sofia walked quietly, her tiny shoes scuffing against the pavement. Finally, she stopped in front of a run-down apartment building, its entrance dim and crowded with old bicycles and trash bins. She looked up at Richard and whispered, "This is where we live." They climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor, where Sofia unlocked a thin, rusted door with a small key she kept tied to a string around her neck. The moment Richard stepped inside, his heart sank. The apartment was dark and cramped, with peeling wallpaper, and only a single window letting in weak light. A mattress lay on the floor with thin blankets, and in the corner, a little boy sat playing quietly with a cracked plastic toy. He looked up with wide eyes when they entered. "That's my brother, Ben," Sofia said softly. Setting her bag down, the boy, barely 4 years old, gave Richard a shy wave before hiding behind his sister's legs. On the other side of the room, Lying on another thin mattress was a woman. She looked frail, her face pale and sunken, her breathing shallow. Sofia hurried over and knelt beside her. "Mama, wake up," she whispered. The woman stirred, opening her eyes slowly. When she saw Richard standing there, confusion crossed her face. "Sofia, who is this?" she asked weakly. Sofia looked at Richard, then back at her mother. "This is Emma's daddy. He's nice. He helped me at school." The woman tried to sit up, but Richard quickly stepped forward and knelt beside her. "Please, don't strain yourself," he said gently. She looked at him with tired but kind eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see us like this," she murmured. We've been struggling." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He had seen poverty before, but never this close. Never through the eyes of someone his own daughter's age. He reached out and took the woman's frail hand carefully. "You don't have to apologize," he said softly. "I came here because I want to help. Whatever you need, medical care, food, anything. I can arrange it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head weakly. "I don't want charity," she whispered. "I just want my children to have a chance. Sofia has been so strong, too strong for her age. She deserves to be a child, not a caretaker." Her words cut straight into Richard's heart. He nodded firmly. "You're right. And I promise you, she will be. I'll make sure of it." Sofia stood silently nearby, holding her little brother's hand. She looked at Richard with a mixture of hope and disbelief, as though she wanted to believe him but was afraid of being let down. Richard met her gaze steadily. "Sofia, I meant what I said. You're not alone anymore." As he left the apartment that evening, his heart heavier than ever, Richard knew he couldn't just make promises. He had to act. This wasn't just about writing a check. It was about restoring a family's dignity, about giving 2 children their childhood back. About saving a mother who had been abandoned by circumstance. He had walked into that dim apartment as a visitor. But as he stepped back into the fading daylight of the city, he realized he had also walked into a new chapter of his life. One where his wealth and power would finally have meaning beyond the boardroom. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she asked softly, "Did you see Sofia's home, Daddy?" Richard kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes. And I promised her something. We're going to help her and her family." Emma smiled sleepily. "Good. Because everyone deserves to be happy." Richard's throat tightened as he watched his daughter drift off to sleep. She was right. Everyone deserved to be happy. And he wasn't going to rest until Sofia and her family had that chance. The next morning, Richard woke up early, leaving behind his usual office routines. His mind was entirely focused on Sofia and her family. He knew that paying her tuition and stopping her from cleaning the school bathrooms was only the first step. The real work had just begun. Richard decided that today he would take practical steps to help Sofia's family. He called his assistant immediately. "Cancel all my morning appointments," he said firmly. "There's something far more important I need to attend to personally." The assistant blinked, surprised, but quickly nodded and began rescheduling the day's meetings. Richard grabbed his keys and left. Determined to do more than just give money, he wanted to see the reality Sofia lived in. When he arrived, Sofia was waiting outside her home, small and nervous. She noticed Richard approaching and hesitated, unsure if she had done something wrong. Richard smiled gently and reassured her, "Don't worry, Sofia. Today, we're going to do something for you and your family." Slowly, she nodded, and together they walked into the apartment. Inside, the contrast between her world and his was stark. The apartment was small and dim, with peeling paint and thin mattresses on the floor. A frail woman lay on one mattress, struggling to sit up, while a little boy, Sofia's younger brother Ben, clutched his sister's hand timidly. The reality of what this child had been carrying alone hit Richard hard. He knelt beside the mother, taking her hand carefully. "You don't have to apologize," he said softly. "I'm here to help. Whatever you need, I'll provide. Medical care, food, anything." Sofia watched silently, holding Ben's hand, as Richard made sure they understood his promise. They were no longer alone. He arranged immediate help for their basic needs. Food, medical attention, and some comfort for the children. For the first time, Sofia's small face softened with hope. Richard knew that this was only the beginning. This family needed more than one-time aid, they needed support to rebuild their lives. As he left the apartment that evening, Richard felt a heavy but determined weight on his shoulders. Paying their school fees had been just the start. He had the means and now the responsibility to truly change their lives. Walking back to his car, he realized this path was no longer about business. It was about humanity. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up sleepily. "Did you see Sofia's home, Daddy?" she asked softly. Richard kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes. And we promised her something. We're going to help her family." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, trusting him completely. Richard knew she was right. Everyone deserved happiness, and he wasn't going to stop until Sofia and her family had it. Richard woke the next morning with a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. The image of Sofia, Ben, and their frail mother lingered in his mind. And he knew that simply paying for their school fees was not enough. There was more to be done, much more. He dressed quickly, skipping breakfast, and called his assistant. "Cancel everything today," he said firmly. "I need to focus on Sofia and her family." The assistant hesitated, sensing the unusual urgency in his voice, but nodded. Richard grabbed his coat and left, determined to transform their lives in a way that went beyond charity. Driving through the city streets, he reflected on the sharp contrast between his world and theirs. His office windows overlooked glass towers, polished floors, and endless reports, while Sofia's apartment had narrow hallways, peeling paint, and barely enough light. The disparity was staggering. Yet it made his mission even clearer. By the time he reached her school, he had already drafted a plan in his mind. Medical care for her mother, food supplies for the children, tutoring for Sofia, and a stable environment where they could live without fear. Sofia spotted him waiting by the school gate, her small frame almost swallowed by the crowd of children rushing home. "Mr. Cole," she whispered as she approached, eyes wide with cautious curiosity. Richard knelt down to her level, smiling gently. "Hi, Sofia. Are you ready for a little adventure?" She tilted her head, puzzled. "Where are we going?" Richard chuckled softly. "You'll see. It's time to make your home a better place." She hesitated briefly, glancing toward Ben who was playing nearby. I think he'll like that," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Together, they walked to the run-down apartment, Richard carrying a small bag of essentials he had picked up on his way. Inside, the familiar dim room greeted them. But today, there was a sense of anticipation however faint. He knelt beside the frail woman lying on the mattress. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling today?" She stirred, opening her eyes slowly. "I'm surviving," she whispered, a weak smile crossing her lips. Richard nodded. "That's why I'm here. Today, we're going to start changing things for you and your children." Her eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief flickering across her face. Richard had brought fresh food, including fruit and bread, and set them on the small table. He arranged for a nurse to visit later in the day, someone who could monitor her health and provide guidance. Sofia watched, wide-eyed, as her father's friend moved about the room with calm efficiency. Ben clung to his sister, peeking curiously at the bags. Richard crouched down to their level. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "You don't have to worry about being alone anymore. Help is here. And we're not leaving." Sofia's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Thank you. I didn't know someone could care this much." Over the next few hours, Richard took inventory of the apartment, and made notes. Broken furniture would be repaired, the small space cleaned thoroughly, and new mattresses would replace the thin, worn ones. He spoke with a local tutor who agreed to come twice a week to help Sofia and Ben with reading and writing. "They deserve to enjoy being children," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "They shouldn't be burdened by responsibilities they didn't ask for." Every decision was made with care, considering not only their physical needs but also their emotional well-being. As afternoon fell, Richard stepped outside with Sofia and Ben for a short walk. The streets were bustling, yet for Richard, the noise faded into the background. He watched Sofia's small hand in his, Ben clinging to her other hand. He realized how fragile life could be, yet how resilient these children were. "You know," he said softly, "you're incredibly brave." But bravery doesn't mean doing everything alone. You can let people help you now. Sofia nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I want to, but I don't want anyone to be disappointed, she admitted. Richard smiled gently. No one will be disappointed. You're doing everything right by being yourself. Returning to the apartment, they prepared a small meal together. Richard encouraged Sofia to stir the soup while he set the table. Ben laughed as a spoon slipped from his fingers, and for a moment, the room felt lighter. Filled with sounds of normal childhood, rather than the tension of survival. Richard's heart swelled. This was the kind of life children should experience. Joy, laughter, and the freedom to be innocent. He realized that wealth, influence, and power meant nothing if it didn't translate into meaningful change for those in need. That evening, the nurse arrived, followed by a local community worker, who would help the family manage resources, and ensure the children were attending school regularly. Richard stayed until everything was arranged, walking through each plan meticulously. He took a moment to kneel beside Sofia and Ben as they prepared for bed. Remember, he said softly, this is your life now. You are safe, you are cared for. And you are free to just be children. Sofia's eyes sparkled with quiet relief, while Ben yawned, curling up against his sister with newfound comfort. Driving home later that night, Richard's mind replayed the day over and over. He had seen despair, yet he had witnessed hope blooming in its place. The family was not just surviving, they were beginning to live. Emma, waiting at home, ran into his arms, sensing something had changed. Did you help them today? Daddy, she asked, eyes shining. Richard smiled, holding her close. Yes, sweetheart. And this is just the beginning. We're going to keep helping them. Every step of the way. That night, Richard sat alone in his study, city lights twinkling outside. But his focus was on Sofia, Ben, and their mother. He realized that real wealth wasn't measured in currency, but in the difference one could make in someone else's life. For the first time, he felt that his resources had a true purpose. And he knew he would not rest until this family, and others like them, had the life they deserved. The following morning, Richard woke with a renewed sense of urgency. Last night's plans had brought some relief, but he knew it was only the beginning. He dressed quickly, leaving his usual luxurious breakfast behind, and called his assistant. Cancel all appointments for today. He instructed firmly. The assistant raised an eyebrow but obeyed, understanding that this was not a whim. Today, Richard was focused entirely on Sofia and her family. He arrived at the apartment early, before the children had left for school. The mother was awake, sitting on her thin mattress. Her frail hands clasped tightly in her lap. Good morning, Richard said gently, kneeling beside her. How did you sleep? She shook her head slowly. Not well. But better knowing someone cares. She murmured. Richard's heart tightened. Care wasn't enough, action was what she and the children needed. He laid out a plan for the day, grocery deliveries, medical visits, and a small renovation to make their home safer and warmer. Sofia and Ben returned from school shortly after. Their eyes widened at the sight of the groceries, fresh blankets, and cleaning supplies waiting for them. Richard smiled, kneeling to their level. Today, we're going to start turning this place into a home where you can feel safe and happy, he said. Sofia's small hand slipped into his, and Ben clung to his sister. The trust in their eyes fueled Richard's determination. They began with the bedroom area. Richard helped Sofia rearrange the thin mattresses and spread out new blankets. Ben giggled as he rolled around in the soft bedding. The first real comfort he had felt in weeks. The mother watched quietly, tears welling up in her eyes. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. But I'm grateful beyond words. Richard shook his head. It's not charity, he said firmly. It's what every child and parent deserves. You've been carrying this alone for too long. Now, you don't have to. Next, Richard focused on the kitchen. He organized the groceries, unpacking fresh vegetables, bread, and other essentials. He showed Sofia how to prepare simple meals, encouraging her to include Ben in the process. Laughter echoed through the small apartment as they chopped vegetables together, a sound that had been absent for far too long. For the first time, the apartment felt alive. By midday, a nurse arrived to examine the mother, assessing her condition and prescribing treatment. Richard spoke with her quietly, ensuring she had access to regular check-ups and medicine. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. Richard smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on your family. That's all that matters." The afternoon brought more surprises. A local carpenter, contacted earlier by Richard, arrived to repair the broken furniture and replace the worn shelves. A tutor came by as well, ready to assist Sofia and Ben with schoolwork. Richard watched as the children engaged with their lessons, eyes bright with curiosity. Sofia laughed as she read aloud, Ben following her lead. Richard felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had ever experienced in boardrooms or business meetings. As evening fell, Richard helped the family prepare a simple dinner. The mother smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks, watching her children eat with delight. Sofia looked up at Richard and whispered, I didn't think anyone would care so much." Richard crouched to her level, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "People do care, Sofia. You just have to let them. And now we'll make sure you always have someone by your side." When it was time to leave, Richard knelt to say goodbye. Sofia hugged him tightly, Ben clinging to her back, while their mother watched silently, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she whispered. Richard smiled softly. "This is just the beginning. Tomorrow we'll do more, and every day after that, until you're safe and happy." Driving home that night, Richard reflected on the day. He realized that his life had shifted fundamentally. Business deals and profits, once the core of his existence, now seemed insignificant compared to the responsibility he had taken on. He had entered Sofia's world as an observer, but left as an active part of it. A protector, a guide, and a friend. When he tucked Emma into bed later, she asked softly, "Did you help Sofia today, Daddy?" Richard kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. And tomorrow we'll do even more." Emma smiled sleepily, resting her head against her pillow. "Good. Because everyone deserves to be happy," she murmured. Richard held her hand, feeling the weight of his promise. He knew the journey would be long, but he was ready. For Sofia, for Ben, for their mother. He would not stop until this family had the life they deserved. The following morning, Richard woke earlier than usual, his mind buzzing with plans. Last night's successes had been small victories. But he knew the real work was only beginning. After dropping Emma at school, he skipped his usual office routine, and drove straight to Sofia's apartment. The city was waking up, people moving quickly along the streets, but Richard's focus was entirely on the small home that had become his priority. When he arrived, Sofia was already outside, waiting with Ben, holding his little hand tightly. Their faces brightened at the sight of him. "Good morning, Sofia." "Good morning, Ben," he greeted warmly. "Ready for another day?" Sofia nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervous curiosity. Ben, still sleepy from the night, gave a small wave. "Come on," Richard said gently. "Today we're going to do something very important. Something that will make your home safer and more comfortable." Inside, the apartment had already seen some improvements. Richard's team had installed sturdier shelving, repaired broken furniture, and laid clean blankets on the mattresses. But there was still much to do. The kitchen needed organization, and the bathroom required basic repairs to prevent leaks and ensure hygiene. Richard walked the children through the tasks patiently, encouraging them to participate in small ways. "You don't have to do everything. But learning little things helps," he explained. Sofia watched him carefully, mimicking his movements, while Ben followed her lead, giggling as he tried to copy every step. Richard's attention then turned to their mother. She was sitting up on her mattress, her hands folded in her lap. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling today?" She smiled faintly, her eyes still tired. "Better," she murmured. "But there's so much to do. I wish I could manage it all." Richard shook his head firmly. "You don't have to do this alone anymore. Today, we'll make sure you have help, and a proper plan for the future." Her eyes filled with tears, and Sofia and Ben clung closer to her. Sensing the change in their small world, they began in the bathroom, where Richard noticed leaks and chipped tiles. He called a local handyman he had contacted earlier, who arrived quickly with tools and supplies. Richard supervised the work while also teaching Sofia small but important lessons in hygiene. Washing hands properly, cleaning surfaces safely, and organizing supplies. "See, Sofia," he said gently. "Learning these things now will help you in the future. But you don't have to do it alone." She nodded, taking in his words carefully, her blue eyes reflecting both determination and relief. After the bathroom, they moved to the kitchen. Richard unpacked groceries he had brought, arranging fresh vegetables, bread and protein for the family. "Today, we're going to make it easier for your mom to cook," he explained. He showed Sofia how to organize the shelves, separate perishable items, and use utensils safely. Ben helped by passing small items to his sister, his laughter filling the apartment. For the first time in weeks, the room felt alive. Not just a space for survival, but a home filled with hope. Around midday, the nurse arrived to check on their mother's condition. Richard stood beside her, listening to the recommendations. Medicines, a proper diet, and scheduled check-ups were arranged. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with gratitude. I never imagined anyone would care so much," she whispered. Richard shook his head gently. "It's not about caring only. It's about making sure you and your children have a chance at a normal life." Lunch was a simple affair, yet filled with warmth. Richard helped Sofia prepare sandwiches and soup, while Ben eagerly assisted where he could. As they ate, he encouraged conversation. "Tell me about school, Sofia. What subjects do you like?" Sofia brightened slightly. "I like reading and drawing," she said shyly. "And I like science too." Richard smiled. "Then we'll make sure you have books and materials for all of that. You'll learn, explore, and enjoy being a child, without worrying about chores that aren't yours to bear." By mid-afternoon, the tutor arrived. Richard introduced her to Sofia and Ben, explaining the plan for structured learning sessions twice a week. Sofia's eyes sparkled with curiosity as the tutor showed her notebooks and pencils. I didn't think anyone would help me with school," she admitted quietly. Richard crouched beside her. "Now you will have all the help you need. You just need to focus on learning and growing. The rest, we'll take care of." After the tutor left, Richard spent a quiet moment with the mother, discussing long-term plans, financial support, medical care, and ensuring the children's education remained uninterrupted. He outlined a schedule for regular visits, ensuring the family had ongoing support rather than one-time aid. "You don't have to worry about anything alone anymore," he repeated. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you. I never imagined someone would step in like this." As evening approached, Richard helped the children prepare for bed. He showed Sofia how to organize her school bag, and encouraged Ben to pick out a small toy to sleep with. He then sat on the edge of their mattress, speaking softly to both. "Remember, you are safe now. You are cared for. And most importantly, you are free to just be children again." Sofia and Ben nodded quietly, their small hands clutching his as they felt the weight of his words sink in. Driving home later that night, Richard reflected on the day. The small apartment had transformed in practical ways, but more importantly, hope had returned to the children's eyes. Emma awaited him at home, and when he tucked her in, she asked eagerly, "Did you make things better for Sofia today, Daddy?" Richard kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. And tomorrow, we'll do even more. This is just the start." Emma smiled, resting her head on her pillow. "Good, everyone deserves to be happy," she whispered. Richard held her hand, silently vowing to continue the work, no matter how long it took. As he sat alone in his study later, city lights glittering through the window, Richard realized that the path he had chosen was far from easy. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt the true purpose of his wealth and influence. It wasn't about power or status. It was about changing lives, restoring dignity, and giving hope. For Sofia, Ben, and their mother, he had become more than a benefactor. He had become a lifeline, a guardian, and a source of unwavering support. And in that quiet moment, he understood that this journey, though challenging, was exactly where he was meant to be. 2. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Richard's study. Yet he didn't notice its golden glow. His mind was already at Sofia's apartment planning the day ahead. After dropping Emma at school, He bypassed his office entirely, driving directly to the small apartment where Sofia and her family lived. Today wasn't just about repairs or groceries. It was about building routines, instilling stability, and giving the children a sense of security they had never known. As he arrived, Sofia and Ben were waiting outside, as if sensing his presence before he even stepped out of the car. Their eyes brightened when they saw him. "Good morning, Sofia." "Good morning, Ben," he greeted warmly. Sofia smiled shyly, gripping Ben's hand. "Morning, Mr. Cole," she said softly. Ben waved, his small face lighting up in recognition. "Come on," Richard said. "We have a busy day ahead." The apartment was already tidier than before. Richard had arranged for volunteers from a local community program to come and help establish a daily routine for the children. Today, they would learn simple cleaning tasks, cooking basics, and most importantly, time management for schoolwork. Richard wanted them to feel empowered, not burdened. He started with the kitchen. "Sofia," he said gently, "let's organize everything you need for the week." Together, they unpacked fresh groceries, vegetables, fruits, bread, eggs and milk. Richard showed Sofia how to separate perishable items, store them properly, and plan simple meals. Ben helped by passing items, giggling whenever he dropped something. "That's okay, Ben," Richard reassured him, picking up the fallen item. "Mistakes happen. We learn from them." Once the kitchen was organized, Richard led the children to the small bedroom area. He helped them set up a study corner for Sofia, placing notebooks, pencils, and a small reading lamp. "This is your learning space," he explained. "Here, you can focus on school and explore new things. You don't have to worry about cleaning bathrooms anymore. That's not your job." Sofia's eyes widened. "Really?" she whispered. Richard smiled. "Really? You're free to just be a student now." While Sofia began organizing her study materials, Richard turned to the mother. "How are you feeling today?" he asked softly. She looked tired but nodded. "Better, but still worried about the children," she admitted. Richard placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. We'll make sure you have support, both for your health and the kids' education." Her eyes welled up, but this time, there were no tears of helplessness, only relief. By mid-morning, volunteers arrived to help with practical tasks. One taught Sofia and Ben basic hygiene routines, while another helped with minor home repairs. Richard supervised, ensuring everything was done correctly but also encouraging the children to participate where appropriate. He wanted them to feel capable, not overwhelmed. "See, Sofia," he said gently. "You're learning and you're strong. But you're not alone." She nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her face for the first time in a long while. Lunch was simple yet filled with warmth. Richard helped prepare sandwiches and soup while encouraging Sofia to try cooking a few small items herself. Ben eagerly assisted, handing ingredients to his sister. For a brief moment, laughter filled the apartment, a sound that had been absent for too long. Richard watched them carefully, a sense of pride and purpose swelling in his chest. He realized that these small moments of normalcy were as important as any large gesture of charity. After lunch, Richard arranged a small outdoor activity for the children. They stepped into a nearby park where Sofia and Ben could play and interact with other kids. Richard watched closely as Sofia ran, laughed, and even hesitated only briefly when she encountered other children. Ben's laughter rang through the park, as he chased after pigeons, free from the weight of responsibility that had burdened him for so long. Richard felt a quiet satisfaction. This was the childhood they deserved, moments of joy, freedom, and play. Returning to the apartment in the late afternoon, Richard focused on creating a study schedule for Sofia and Ben. He explained the importance of balancing schoolwork, playtime, and rest. "You see, children," he said gently, "learning is important, but so is rest and play. You need all three to grow healthy and strong." Sofia listened intently, nodding slowly. Ben, though distracted by a small toy, seemed to grasp the concept through the routine Richard was establishing. The mother watched silently, gratitude evident in her eyes. "I can't believe you've done so much for us," she whispered. Richard shook his head firmly. "It's not about what I've done. It's about what you and your children deserve. You've been strong. But it's time to let others help you." Sofia's small hand slipped into her mother's, and the mother's hand found Richard's. In that quiet connection, a sense of hope and trust blossomed. As evening fell, Richard prepared the children for bed. He helped Sofia organize her backpack for the next day and tucked Ben in with a small toy he had chosen himself. "Remember," Richard said softly, "you're safe, cared for, and free to be children. Your job is to grow, learn, and enjoy life." Sofia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of trust and wonder. Ben hugged his sister tightly, his small face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Driving home later that night, Richard reflected on the day. Every small task, every lesson, every moment of laughter had reinforced his purpose. He realized that his wealth and power were most meaningful when used to transform lives directly, to restore dignity and hope. For Sofia, Ben, and their mother, he was no longer just a benefactor. He was a constant, reliable presence. When he tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked softly, "Did you make them happy today, Daddy?" Richard kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. And tomorrow, we'll do even more. This is just the beginning." Emma smiled, her small hand resting on her pillow. "Good. Everyone deserves to be happy." Richard held her hand, silently promising to continue this work until the family had everything they deserved. As he sat alone in his study, city lights twinkling through the window, Richard felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time, he understood the true power of his influence. Not in boardrooms or contracts, but in the lives he could change for the better. And for Sofia and her family, he would walk this path without hesitation, knowing that hope, care, and action were the most valuable gifts he could give. The next morning, Richard woke earlier than usual, the weight of responsibility he had embraced for Sofia and her family pressing on his mind. The sun had barely risen over the skyline, casting a soft, golden glow across his office as he sipped his coffee, reviewing plans for the day. Today wasn't about paying bills or scheduling repairs. It was about education. Sofia had shown curiosity and intelligence beyond her years, but she needed guidance, structure, and encouragement to rebuild a childhood that had been taken too soon. After dropping Emma at school, Richard drove straight to Sofia's apartment. As he arrived, he noticed her small figure standing outside, waiting patiently, holding Ben's hand. Their eyes lit up when they saw him. "Good morning, Sofia." "Good morning, Ben," Richard greeted warmly. Sofia smiled shyly, but Ben waved enthusiastically. "Ready for another day?" Richard asked. They nodded, and together they walked into the apartment, where a sense of purpose hung in the air. Richard had arranged for a volunteer tutor to arrive that morning. A young teacher named Anna who specialized in early childhood education. Anna entered the apartment with a bright smile, carrying a bag filled with books, worksheets, and educational games. "Good morning, Sofia!" "Hi, Ben! Are you ready to learn and have some fun?" she asked cheerfully. Sofia's eyes sparkled, though she still seemed unsure about receiving attention focused entirely on her. I think so," she whispered. Ben, on the other hand, jumped excitedly, thrilled by the colorful books and toys. Richard crouched beside Sofia, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "this is your time. Nobody expects you to be perfect. You're allowed to explore, ask questions, and even make mistakes. That's how you learn." Sofia nodded, absorbing his words. For the first time, learning didn't feel like a chore, it felt like an opportunity. Anna began with simple reading exercises. She encouraged Sofia to sound out letters, form words, and read sentences aloud. Richard observed quietly, occasionally prompting her with gentle guidance. Ben sat nearby, coloring and exploring alphabet blocks, his laughter and chatter bringing life to the apartment. Richard noticed how Sofia's posture changed slightly as she became more confident with each word she read. The rigid tension that had been etched into her small frame seemed to loosen, replaced by curiosity and a hint of pride. Mid-morning, Richard and Anna transitioned to math exercises. Sofia initially hesitated, the weight of past responsibilities making her doubt her abilities. "You can do this," Richard said softly. "It's okay to try. It's okay to get it wrong. That's part of learning." Slowly, she began solving simple addition and subtraction problems, her confidence growing with each correct answer. Anna clapped enthusiastically. "Great job, Sofia! You're really good at this." Sofia's face lit up with a small shy smile, a rare moment of pure joy. After a brief break, Richard suggested a creative activity. How about drawing or storytelling, Sofia? You can make up anything you want. There's no right or wrong. Sofia's eyes widened with excitement. She picked up colored pencils, and began to draw her apartment, her mother, Ben and herself. Each stroke carried emotion, a combination of memory and imagination. Richard knelt beside her, admiring her work. "This is wonderful," he said genuinely. "You're telling your story in your own way." Sofia glanced up at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a newfound sense of self-expression. Meanwhile, Ben explored with his toys, occasionally showing Richard his little inventions. Richard laughed softly, enjoying the simplicity of a child's creativity unburdened by worry. The apartment, once filled with tension and fatigue, now vibrated with laughter, learning, and energy. Richard realized that this was more than education. It was healing. The children were reclaiming their childhoods. One small lesson at a time. As lunch approached, Richard suggested preparing a meal together. "Today, we'll make sandwiches and fruit salad," he said. Sofia and Ben eagerly assisted, washing vegetables, slicing bread and arranging the ingredients. Richard supervised carefully, ensuring safety while encouraging independence. "See, Sofia, you're capable of so much," he said. "But it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Sofia nodded, taking his words to heart. Ben, meanwhile, sampled a slice of fruit, giving an approving thumbs up, causing the others to laugh. After lunch, Richard arranged for a local health worker to visit. The mother had struggled with her illness for years, unable to access consistent medical care. Richard wanted to ensure she received proper attention. The health worker examined her, prescribed medications, and discussed ways to manage her condition safely at home. Richard stayed nearby, listening attentively, ready to arrange additional resources if needed. The mother's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but relief. For the first time in years, she felt supported. By late afternoon, the children returned to their studies. Richard noticed how Sofia's focus had sharpened, how she engaged actively with Anna's lessons. He realized the importance of consistency. These small, daily efforts were transforming her, building resilience and confidence. Richard felt a deep sense of responsibility, understanding that true change required commitment, patience, and empathy. He wasn't just providing material aid. He was creating an environment where the children could thrive emotionally, intellectually, and physically. As evening approached, Richard prepared the children for bed. He helped Sofia organize her study materials for the next day, ensuring that she understood her schedule. Ben played quietly with a small toy, occasionally glancing at his sister. "Remember," Richard said softly, "tomorrow is another chance to learn, explore, and enjoy life. You're safe, you're cared for, and you're not alone." Sofia nodded, her eyes reflecting trust and hope. Ben yawned and hugged his sister, exhausted but content. Driving home later that night, Richard reflected on the day. Every small step, the reading lessons, the math exercises, the creative projects, the meal preparation, and the medical care, was a thread weaving a safety net for Sofia and her family. He realized that impact wasn't measured in grand gestures alone but in consistent, compassionate action. For the first time, he felt that his wealth and influence had real purpose beyond the confines of his corporate empire. When he tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked softly, "Did Sofia enjoy today, Daddy?" Richard kissed her forehead, smiling gently. "Yes, sweetheart, she did. And tomorrow, we'll continue helping her grow, learn, and enjoy being a child." Emma's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Good. Because everyone deserves happiness." Richard held her hand, silently pledging to himself that he would ensure Sofia, Ben, and their mother had the opportunities and care they deserved. Sitting alone in his study afterward, Richard gazed at the city lights, reflecting on the transformation he was witnessing. It wasn't only Sofia and her family who were being changed. It was him as well. He had always measured success in numbers, profits, and achievements, but now he understood that true success lay in impact, empathy, and human connection. He whispered Sofia's name softly, letting it anchor his commitment. This journey was only beginning, but he felt certain of one truth: with care, consistency, and love, he could help restore not just childhoods, but hope, dignity, and joy. The morning sun filtered softly through the thin curtains of Sofia's apartment, illuminating the small room where the children were already awake. Richard arrived quietly, as promised, carrying a bag filled with books, school supplies, and a few little treats for Sofia and Ben. The children's eyes lit up at the sight of him, a mixture of curiosity and excitement evident on their faces. "Good morning, Sofia!" "Good morning, Ben!" he greeted warmly. Ben ran toward him, nearly tripping over his own feet, while Sofia smiled shyly but brightly, clutching her little notebook tightly. "Today," Richard began, "we have a lot of fun ahead. We're going to learn, create, and explore. But first," he knelt down to Sofia's level, "we're going to make a plan. A plan for your learning and for your days. Does that sound good?" Sofia nodded, feeling a strange sense of responsibility that didn't feel like a burden. "Yes," she whispered, "I want to do my best." Richard's chest tightened. Her determination was admirable, but he knew he needed to balance that with care, patience, and childhood joys she had been denied. They began with reading exercises, but Richard had noticed that Sofia had grown more confident over the past days. Her voice was clearer, stronger, her pronunciation sharper. Anna, the tutor, watched from the corner, beaming quietly. She encouraged Sofia to read aloud, asking questions about the story, sparking her imagination and comprehension skills. Ben, nearby, was occupied with colorful blocks and alphabet puzzles, giggling whenever he solved a small challenge. The room was alive with laughter, learning, and a newfound warmth. After reading, Richard introduced Sofia to basic writing exercises. "Sofia," he said, handing her a notebook and pencil, "today, I want you to write about your favorite thing to do. Don't worry about mistakes. Just write what comes to your mind." Sofia hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, slowly, she began to write, her small hand moving carefully across the paper. Richard watched intently, offering encouragement whenever she paused. "You're doing wonderfully," he said softly. "Every word you write is a step toward your dreams." By mid-morning, they transitioned to math. Anna brought a set of colorful math games to make the experience more engaging. "Sofia," she said cheerfully, "let's solve these problems together. We'll make it fun." Richard joined in, guiding her through the exercises with patience and gentle explanations. Sofia's face lit up each time she solved a problem correctly, her confidence growing with every success. Even Ben contributed by counting blocks and helping Sofia check her answers. Richard felt a surge of pride, not only in her abilities but in the environment they were building together. Once the lessons were complete, Richard suggested a break and a small physical activity. "Let's stretch and move a bit," he said. They created a small obstacle course in the living room, using chairs, cushions, and other household items. Sofia and Ben laughed as they navigated the course, their energy flowing freely. Richard joined in, climbing over cushions and dodging around makeshift obstacles. For a moment, he forgot the world outside this apartment. The skyscrapers, the meetings, the pressures of being a CEO. Here, he was simply a mentor, a guide, and a friend. Lunch followed, and Richard had prepared a simple meal with the children's input. Sofia chopped vegetables carefully while Ben arranged the plates under Richard's supervision. "Cooking together can be fun," he said. "And it teaches us teamwork." The meal was modest but hearty, and the shared preparation created a bond of trust and comfort. As they ate, Richard listened to Sofia recount her day at school, her favorite subjects, and even small challenges she faced with classmates. Her voice was filled with wonder and curiosity, unburdened by adult responsibilities for the first time in years. After lunch, Richard introduced a creative session. "Today we're going to make art," he said, handing Sofia and Ben blank sheets of paper, paints, and brushes. "Paint whatever you feel. Don't worry about rules or colors. Just express yourself." Sofia hesitated, then dipped her brush into bright red paint, creating bold strokes across the paper. Ben splashed color enthusiastically, giggling at the mess he made. Richard watched with admiration, noticing how Sofia's expression softened, how her posture relaxed, and how her tiny body carried a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. Later, Richard had arranged for a local musician, a young woman named Lily, to visit and introduce the children to music. She brought a small keyboard and guitar, teaching simple songs and rhythms. Sofia's eyes widened with fascination as she touched the keys and listened to the melodies. Ben clapped along, laughing whenever a note sounded wrong. Richard joined in, clapping and singing softly, creating a warm, lively atmosphere in the otherwise quiet apartment. Music, he realized, was more than entertainment, it was therapy, healing hidden scars of stress, exhaustion, and neglect. As the afternoon faded into evening, Richard turned his attention to Sofia's mother. He had arranged for a nurse to visit regularly, but he also took the time to speak with her himself. "How are you feeling today?" he asked gently. The woman, though tired, managed a small smile. "Better," she whispered. "Knowing Sofia is safe, learning, and being happy, it gives me strength." Richard felt a deep sense of purpose. He knew that empowering Sofia also empowered her mother, creating a ripple effect that could transform the entire family's life. As night approached, Richard helped Sofia and Ben prepare for bed. He ensured Sofia's homework and lessons for the next day were organized and ready. Ben yawned, snuggling next to his sister, while Sofia quietly hugged Richard, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." He smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You're welcome, Sofia. Remember, every day is a new chance to learn, explore, and enjoy your childhood. You deserve it." Driving home, Richard reflected on the day's events. Every moment, the reading, math, art, music, meals and care, was part of a larger journey to restore balance, hope and childhood to Sofia and Ben. Richard realized that this journey wasn't only transforming the children, it was reshaping him as well. He had always measured success in profits and achievements, but now he understood that true fulfillment came from compassion, action, and connection. When he tucked Emma into bed later that night, she looked up with sleepy eyes. "Did Sofia enjoy her day, Daddy?" she asked. Richard kissed her forehead, smiling warmly. "Yes, sweetheart. And tomorrow we'll continue helping her grow, learn, and be a child." Emma nodded, her innocent wisdom reminding him why this journey mattered so deeply. "Good. Everyone deserves happiness," she whispered, drifting off to sleep. Richard held her hand for a moment longer, silently promising himself that he would ensure Sofia, Ben, and their mother had the chance to live with dignity, joy, and hope. Sitting alone in his study, Richard gazed at the city lights, reflecting on the transformation unfolding before him. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. Sofia's life was slowly changing, and with consistent guidance, support and care, he knew the children's future could be brighter than he had ever imagined. Whispering Sofia's name, he anchored the promise he had made, to protect, guide, and empower them. The journey was only beginning, but he was determined to see it through, no matter how long it took. The morning light spilled gently through the curtains of Sofia's small apartment, illuminating the warmth that had slowly begun to fill the once dark space. Richard arrived as promised, carrying a bag of books, stationery, and fresh clothes for Sofia and Ben. But today felt different. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, as if even the walls of the apartment sensed the transformation that had begun. Sofia peeked from behind the doorway, her small eyes wide, her heart beating with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Ben clutched his sister's hand tightly, sensing that today something extraordinary was about to happen. Richard knelt down, smiling gently. "Good morning, my brave ones. Today is special." Sofia tilted her head curiously. "Special? How?" Richard's eyes softened. "Because today we're not just learning. Today, we're taking the first big step toward changing your lives. Forever." Sofia's lips trembled into a small smile. For the first time, she felt that sense of safety and hope she had been denied for so long. They began the day with lessons, as usual, but Richard had arranged for something remarkable. He had connected with local educators, child psychologists, and volunteers who were inspired by Sofia's story. Within hours, a small team arrived bringing supplies, books, and smiles. The children were introduced to tutors who were patient, kind and passionate about helping them grow. Sofia's eyes glistened as she realized that people genuinely cared, that the world wasn't as cold as it had seemed. Ben's laughter echoed across the room as he played with puzzles and toys, free from the worry that usually clouded his tiny mind. Richard then spoke with Sofia's mother. The nurse had come earlier in the day, checking her health, giving advice, and arranging medical care. Richard assured her that she no longer needed to bear the burden alone. "Your children are safe learning and growing," he said gently. "And you deserve time to heal, to rest, to be cared for." The woman's eyes filled with tears, gratitude shining through exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Richard shook his head. "No thanks are needed. Just promise me one thing: let your children be children. That's all the thanks I need." Afternoon brought a new adventure. Richard had organized a small day trip to a nearby park. Sofia and Ben ran freely, their laughter blending with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. Richard watched them, feeling a wave of fulfillment unlike anything money or success had ever given him. He realized that life's true value wasn't in boardrooms or bank accounts. It was in moments like these: smiles, laughter, safety, love, and hope. Sofia climbed a small hill, her face glowing, Ben toddled behind her, and Richard felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm hues of orange and pink, Richard gathered Sofia and her mother for a small talk. "You've all been through so much," he said softly. "But today marks the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where you're safe, educated, and empowered. Sofia, you will never have to work in a bathroom again. Ben, you'll have a childhood full of joy and wonder. And to your mother, you will receive care, support, and hope." Tears streamed down their faces, mingling with smiles and gratitude. That evening, as Richard tucked Emma into bed, she asked softly, "Daddy, did Sofia enjoy her day?" Richard kissed her forehead and whispered, "More than you can imagine. And tomorrow, we'll continue making life better for them." Emma smiled sleepily. "Good. Everyone deserves happiness." Richard's heart swelled. His wealth, influence, and power had finally found their true purpose, not for himself, but for giving life, hope, and dreams to those who had none. Back in his study, Richard reflected on the journey. From the moment he had seen Sofia scrubbing the bathroom, his world had shifted. He realized that compassion and action could reshape destinies. Money alone couldn't heal wounds, but love, care, and determination could. He whispered Sofia's name softly, vowing to continue this path until the family's life was fully restored. Days turned into weeks. Sofia excelled in school, her confidence blossoming. Ben grew healthier, happier, and more curious about the world around him. Their mother regained strength and hope. Richard continued to guide them, teach them, and protect them, not as a distant benefactor, but as a steadfast presence in their lives. The family, once lost in struggle, was now united in love, opportunity, and hope. One evening, as Richard walked home from their apartment, he thought about how a single moment, a glimpse of a child in need, had changed everything. It reminded him that the smallest actions could create ripples that transformed lives. He smiled, realizing that true wealth wasn't measured by money or power, but by the lives you touched, the hope you gave, and the love you shared. Richard looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Sofia, Ben, you are not alone anymore. Your future is bright, and I'll always be here." In that moment, he felt an indescribable peace. The journey had begun with empathy and courage, and it had blossomed into transformation, healing, and hope. And so, the story of a little girl who had once scrubbed a school bathroom became a story of triumph, love, and redemption. Richard, Emma, Sofia, and Ben were no longer just names. They were a reminder that life could change in a single day. That compassion had power beyond measure, and that hope, when nurtured, could conquer any hardship. If you feel inspired by Richard and Sofia's journey, if this story moved you, imagine how many lives you could change by spreading kindness and support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that touch hearts, inspire action, and remind us of the true meaning of humanity. Every action counts, every moment can change a life.